Welcome to Trench Diaries. This is Iron Coffins part 37. I was glad that July was coming to an end. As in the previous months, conditions were deteriorating noticeably. Strong Allied forces, which had advanced from Normandy against the light resistance of our rear, threatened to cut off Brittany from the rest of France and interrupt our connection with Germany. Our important submarine bases on the Atlantic coast were increasingly exposed to the danger of encirclement the longer our counter-offensives were delayed. The bases, the once very busy ports of Brest, Lorient and Saint-Nazaire, along with the once glorious submarine flotillas, were practically already extinct. In July alone, another 18 boats were sunk. Most fell victim to the aircraft of the British Coastal Command. Among them were the outdated boats U-212 and U-214, which had been sent out from Brest without snorkels to keep our coastal front clear of Allied forces. English destroyers, tightening the ring around Brest, had sent both boats to the bottom. At the end of July, I also said goodbye to my friends Dieter Sachse, U-413, and Heinz Siedler, U-984. They were ordered on solo missions into the Channel, and both boats were strangely detected and destroyed on the same day, August the 20th, by anti-submarine groups. Both boats were total losses. After my two comrades set sail, I felt quite superfluous. Command had still not made a decision about my future. Winter tried in vain to advocate for me, and in the absence of my usual onboard duties, I prepared for infantry combat. The siege of Brest was no longer preventable. Strong American tank units were rolling through the highlands of Brittany, and our troops began to retreat to Brest. The city was declared a fortress. My men, as long as they were not in the hospital, received rifles and machine guns, and I was instructed to train them in infantry combat. Our prospects of being trapped in the fortress of Brest, and thereby being caught in a trap, were only too good. On a sunny day in early August, I was returning with my men from a field exercise when I was informed that the flotilla chief wanted to see me. Winter greeted me with a rare smile. "You're a lucky man, Werner. You have been appointed commander of U-953. Congratulations." I was pleasantly surprised, thrilled even. Marbach, the boat's commander, had been ordered to Dönitz's Berlin headquarters after the sinking of the three destroyers to receive his Knight's Cross. With the breakthrough of the Allies through our position and the encirclement of Brest, Marbach's return to the base had been made impossible. "You will greet the crew as the new commander in 1 hour, Winter continued. "The boat is, as you know, equipped with a snorkel. The repair work will be finished in about 10 days. Prepare yourself for an interesting mission." "Thank you, Commander." This new command gave my prospects for the immediate future a new direction. Instead of being trapped in the fortress of Brest, shot on land, or humiliated in a prisoner of war camp, I would at least be in a position to fight and die at sea. That was the war I knew and the place where I belonged. At the appointed hour, I took command of Marbach's boat. Most of his men knew me or had at least heard of me. This fact, along with the impending siege, prompted the men to receive their new commander with a sense of relief. Since part of the crew was on leave and could not return on board, I filled the gaps with sailors and stokers from U-415. Instead of fighting tanks on land, they preferred to face the English destroyers inside a little dinghy. The days passed quickly with preparations for departure. My motley crew worked with all their might to meet the departure deadline, and their help compensated for the lack of reliable and experienced shipyard workers. The Allied advance encouraged more and more French shipyard workers to stop working for the occupying forces. Some ran away during the lunch break, others did not return to work in the morning. The situation escalated by the hour. The rest of my men from U-415, those I could not take on my new boat, were sent to the front trenches of Brest. Also, the crew was continuously approached by German civilian employees who offered them large amounts of money as bribes to smuggle them on board and let them escape from the trap. Under such hectic conditions, it was impossible for us to meet the departure date. Brest was expecting the enemy. More and more German troops were streaming into the city as fast motorized American units broke through from Normandy, threatened Paris, besieged Lorient, and reached the port of Saint-Nazaire. The citizens of Brest hid in their homes, awaiting what was to come with a mix of fear, stoicism, and hope for liberation. Far too late, our submarine command ordered the evacuation of the bases at Brest, Lorient, and Saint-Nazaire, which were already encircled by the remaining submarines. By this time, the English fleet had already anticipated Dönitz's order and had sealed off our escape routes. Strong destroyer groups had steamed south and now lay off the three important ports. Night after night, Allied aircraft dropped their mines into the waterways, stopping all traffic and turning the boat's departure into a dangerous affair. Besides hunting at sea, the Royal Air Force repeatedly attacked all bases with great strength. The remnants of a submarine fleet that once comprised several hundred frontline boats tried to delay their destruction by hiding in the gloomy, nearly empty bunkers under the protection of 7 meters of reinforced concrete. On August 12, 1944, at 10:45 am, the air raid sirens wailed through the Brest base. I took cover with my men in the tunnels blasted into the rock. Almost immediately, a furious shooting began. From the entrance of the underground vaults, I saw a swarm of about 40 four-engine aircraft dive out of the sun. They flew at medium altitude, undeterred by the concentrated fire of our heavy flak. Black mushrooms suddenly stood everywhere in the air. The planes came closer unperturbed, maintaining their altitude and course persistently. A wing broke off from the fuselage of one aircraft and floated through the air. The plane spun, circled, and fell into the bay. The white dots of 4 parachutes unfolded in the blue of the morning shortly before the plane hit the water. The rest of the aircraft formation flew in a straight line towards our bunker. A second plane caught fire and veered out of formation. A third aircraft exploded, and at that moment, the other planes, all Lancasters, each released a bomb. The huge bombs were clearly visible. I hurriedly retreated into the darkness of the tunnel, and then the world was turned upside down. Volcanic-like eruptions shook the mountain and made the air tremble. Hard pressure waves hit us with a crushing force and took our breath away. Sky-high fountains of dust and debris shot against the useless tethered balloons and blurred the panorama. A few heavy jolts and a regular pounding of our heavy flag, a deep hum in the air to the north, and then a strange silence. Concerned about my new boat, I ran down the mountain to the bunker, climbed over piles of stones, broken reinforced concrete, rushed into the dark coolness of the bunker, and found U-953 unharmed at its berth. I hurried through the vault, along the many empty berths, to the end of the bunker itself. A group of gesticulating workers blocked my way. They stared mesmerized at the ceiling. And then I saw the cracks too. Bent rebar protruded here and there in the vault. U-247, the only boat at the pier, was covered with a thin layer of cement dust. The 6-ton bomb, the heaviest the Allies had at their disposal, had harmlessly dissipated its force. This hit was the only one the bunker had suffered. The enormous effort of our opponents to sink the last submarines already in the port was a complete failure. I returned to my own boat to check on the progress of the work, which I hoped to finish within the next 4 days. On the upper deck, I was stopped by my XO, who had already served with Marbach. He asked me to come to the bow compartment. I climbed through the forward hatch into the dim light of the boat and stared into the gaping opening of tube number 3. The rear torpedo hatch lay on deck. The muzzle cap, the only safety closed part apart from the muzzle flap itself, had come loose from the lock and had broken off at the hinge. I was more than astonished. I was extremely concerned. The chief engineer explained this to me. This is from the pressure wave of one of the bombs that exploded about 50 meters aft in the harbor basin. We could have lost many boats this way. With open muzzle flaps and a faulty rear hatch, a boat only needs one depth charge to sink into eternity. Those who have experienced this cannot, unfortunately, tell us how it happened. Listen, Chief, I replied angrily. If our muzzle flaps had been open, our boat would also now be on the bottom and we both would have to either drag ourselves through the trenches in the future or prepare for a long walk to a prisoner of war camp. Please, check all the rear hatches and have this one replaced as quickly as possible. I don't want to wait any longer to depart. As in Brest, the Allied air raids in our bunkers in Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, La Pallice and Bordeaux had little or no success. The Anglo-American advances on the land front, however, caused widespread dismay. Every boat that could escape ran to our threatened northern bases to head for further overhaul at the joint entry of La Pallice and La Rochelle. These 2 ports, which had an entryway between the island Ile de Ré and Ile de Lorient, were not yet encircled by Allied troops or blocked by English naval forces. They still offered an escape route through France for thousands of sailors who were ordered to retreat. These 2 ports were designated by the Submarine High Command as refuges for submarines from the northern ports. Here, our boats received whatever equipment and repairs they needed for the subsequent mission. But the Royal Navy dominated the waters around the northern ports, and our crews, who left the bases with their sluggish, superficially patched up and mostly snorkel-less boats, had little chance of reaching the 2 southern ports. Boats that were not sunk by blockade destroyers fell victim to mines or aircraft bombs. U-736, departing from Lorient, was sunk near the coast on August 6th. U-608 was shattered by bombs almost at the same location on August 10th. 1 day later, U-385 was torn to pieces by depth charges. On August the 12th, U-270 was destroyed off Lorient and U-981 hit a mine while trying to enter the port of La Rochelle and was subsequently sunk by bombs. On August the 14th, U-618 was bombed to a diving disabled state by an air attack and shortly thereafter destroyed by destroyers. On August 18th, U-107 succumbed to a series of bombs and U-621 fell victim to an experienced English anti-submarine group. During these days of the slow decay of our Atlantic wall on land and at sea, setbacks were also reported from other fronts. Soviet armies had recaptured the cities of Przemyśl, Bialystok, Kovno and Pskov and were pushing deeper into the old Russian territories with a powerful offensive. In Greece, our divisions had lost battle after battle. Romania had switched to the enemy's camp. In Italy, our troops were retreating from Rome and were engaged in heavy fighting north of the city. To complete the extent of the defeats and retreats, a strong Allied invasion army had landed on August the 15th between Marseille and Toulon on the French Mediterranean coast. Motorized units racing north from this new front threatened to cut off our divisions in western France. The submarine base in Toulon was overrun and wiped out with the sinking of 8 submarines, including the old U-230. In this way, the submarine war in the Mediterranean came to a halt. The grim picture of impending disaster was further completed by the loss of our destroyers, minesweepers and patrol boats in the Mediterranean and other French waters. With our retreats came confusion and panic. The atmosphere in the fortress of Brest approached a flashpoint. Our soldiers were forbidden to enter the city, the population was also under strict curfew. The shipyards were secured by naval soldiers and all anti-aircraft guns were moved to strategic positions to strengthen the ring defense of Brest. Naval units, armed to the teeth, patrolled through the city and suburbs. The Naval School, the former seat of the famous 1st U-boat flotilla, was declared the center of the defense of Brest due to its extensive bunker facilities. The 9th U-boat flotilla was dissolved and its commander was instructed by Dönitz to leave the port and break through to Norway by submarine. Indeed, he managed the nearly impossible feat of hastily repairing Brauer's stripped-down U-256, equipping it with a makeshift snorkel, slipping out of the port, breaking through the English blockade, and reaching Norway. Commander Winter moved the last units of the 1st U-boat flotilla into the caves in the rocks and bravely repelled an infantry invasion. A large number of arrogant infantry officers who had escaped the battle for Germany's fate and preserved their easy lives in France stormed into the port city with their mistresses and a train of personal luggage, wine and champagne. Some of the gentlemen demanded submarine transport for themselves and their possessions and were outraged when Winter politely but firmly refused them. The situation escalated almost to the point of a riot when the first shots were fired in the front lines and the first German tanks came within sight of the outer defense line. During these chaotic days, when the Navy was the sole defender of Brest and no one knew where the front was, what the next day would bring, or when the Allies would attack, only 3 submarines remained in the besieged port. U-953, U-256 and U-247 were nearing their superficial completion, which would allow them to attempt a breakout into the relative freedom of the sea. U-247, barely seaworthy, attempted the breakout but was sunk 4 days later. There were no survivors. In mid-August, U-953 was finally declared partially seaworthy. Both the diesel engines were in the worst conditions they had ever been. The batteries had been scheduled for replacement in early summer, but there were neither spare parts nor materials nor an opportunity to carry out these repairs. The occupation of the Crozon Peninsula by the Americans and the incursions of the English into the airspace over Brest prevented us from conducting diving exercises with the snorkel. We doubled our watch on board to thwart any attempts by French resistance groups to sink our boat while it was still at the pier. With much ingenuity, we managed to equip the boat with fuel and provisions, and to my dismay, I received orders to load the boat and tubes with engineering equipment, scientific instruments, valuable devices, and technical personnel instead of a load of torpedoes. I was to transport this important cargo to La Rochelle, where the civilians with their apparatuses were to attempt to make their way through enemy-occupied France to Germany. I assessed the situation critically and made a quick decision. What was good for civilians was even better for the rest of my old crew. I obtained Winter's permission to take my healthy men from U-415 on board and lead them out of the trap. I gathered the men from the trenches, then drove heavily armed to the hospital to say goodbye to our wounded. I knew they faced a long siege and an even longer stay behind barbed wire. Then I instructed my crew to leave all unnecessary items at the base. Each man was allowed to bring only 1 suitcase or sea bag on board. I supervised their departure from the 1st U-boat flotilla complex, and when I arrived at the pier in the bunker with my few belongings, I was confronted by an excited crowd of shouting and gesticulating civilians, Germans and French, who were trying to board by force. My men pushed the frenzied group back onto the pier with fists and rifle butts. Some of these civilians were so desperate that we had to keep them at bay with submachine guns. The crew assembled on the aft deck for the final roll call. 6 civilians stood on the bridge, tense and a little lost. My new first watch officer reported the reinforced crew. With the embarked technicians and myself, there were 99 men, 45 more than under normal circumstances. Hoping to disperse the crowd on the pier, I gave loud and discouraging instructions. I said, "Men, I want to emphasize that this will be one of our most difficult undertakings. We will move from pier to pier with all personnel, including the surplus from U-415, at battle stations. The crew of U-953 will man their stations, the guests from U-415 will take their old stations. You will work, eat and sleep at battle stations. There will be no wandering, no unnecessary talking, no entertainment. Buckets as toilet substitutes will be provided in all areas. You must be aware that the coastal waters are teeming with enemy vessels, and I consider our chances of breaking through the blockade to be very slim. So, do not harbor any false illusions. Prepare for immediate departure. No one leaves the boat, regardless of the reason." I dismissed the men and turned to the 6 civilians. For the first time, they realized their impending danger. 2 grabbed their luggage and hurried off the boat. I was amused and glad to see them disappear. Their departure gave us more breathing space. The 4 brave ones followed me below deck. The central corridor and individual compartments, except for the control room, were packed with large, bulky crates, suitcases, equipment and instruments. In the forward compartment, imported material was stowed in the torpedo storages and tubes and stacked on the floor plates. I told the 4 guests that this narrow passageway was the place and that they were not to leave it for any reason at all. Then I left them standing there in full confusion. I went ashore once more to report to Winter my readiness to depart. I climbed the slope to the base, I heard the barking of machine gun fire and saw Winter's adjutant storming down the hill. Out of breath, he informed me that 4 more technicians would board, men whom the Reich did not want to lose to the Americans. However, since these men would not be ready until the next morning, our departure was delayed by 24 hours. Annoyed by this new delay, I returned to the boat. For the longer I was held in port, the harder my escape from Brest and the breakthrough through the blockades to La Rochelle would be. Soon the scent of goulash wafted through the boat. The men sat on crates and suitcases, pipes and bunks, eating the meal they hoped would be their last in the fortress of Brest. Our loudspeakers softly played popular songs. I sat at the small desk in my nook, contemplating my escape. Then the music suddenly stopped, and the announcer began to speak. "This is a special broadcast for our U-boat comrades trapped in Brest. The time has come to free yourselves from this futile fight. If you come out of the harbor with a white flag on your periscope, we will receive and treat you with respect. But if you are determined to continue fighting, you will face swift destruction. I say this especially to you, men of U-953. You are about to embark on a new mission. I can tell you that dozens of our destroyers are waiting to give you a proper reception. They will deal you the fate that your friends have already met. If you decide to continue your war, they will quickly sink you. I warn you, this will be your last mission." I had only been half listening and angrily called into the radio room. "To hell with this! Turn off that nonsense and put on some decent music." "Sir, this is the only station we can currently receive in the boat." "Then turn off the radio and put on some records." In the morning of August the 15th, our last 4 guests arrived on board with numerous suitcases and equipment. I forbade them from bringing more personal belongings than I allowed myself and my men, and after a heated exchange, they parted with most of their private wealth. I locked them in the aft torpedo room and told them that they would have to stay, eat, sleep, and possibly die there. Then I ordered the pressure hull to be closed, except for the conning tower hatch, commanded the radio to be turned off and the batteries to be charged. As I left the boat, the 2 diesels were smoking and roaring in the hollow of the bunker. I stepped out of the cool dark bunker into blinding sunlight and summer heat and climbed the hill to make my final report to Winter. The massive rock with the extensive buildings of the first U-boat flotilla was occupied by soldiers in infantry uniforms. Some of the officers wore uniforms more suited for an evening at the Paris Opera than for the defense of Brest. Confusion and nervous tension reigned everywhere. Infantry ambulances were parked at the tunnel entrance, unloading the first wounded. Grim fighting raged in the outer trenches, and some American tanks had broken through at various points and had advanced into the immediate vicinity of the flotilla. Looking for Winter, I hurried through the cool catacombs blasted into the rock. Then I learned that he had gone back to the base. So I followed the clearly audible flak fire and reached the deserted quarters just as a black plume of smoke rose into the sky about 700 meters north of our main gate.
On the flat roof of the southeast wing, I saw some officers in blue directing their glasses at the smoke cloud. I rushed up the stone steps and found Winter amidst his confidants, who were highly satisfied with the success of our guns. An American tank had been destroyed while attacking the base. Winter, as I noted, had already accepted the fact that an older general had taken over the defense of Brest. I approached my commander and reported U-953 ready to sail. "You can sail at your own discretion," Winter suggested. "When do you intend to depart?" "After sunset, Commander, at 9:30 p.m. "Fine," he said. "I will bid farewell to your men, but please, no special measures. The shipyard workers should not get the idea that you might sail tonight." As we descended the hill, the air raid sirens began to wail again. We hurried to the entrance of the tunnels, and moments later, the mountain trembled under an endless chain of explosions and heavy blows. I followed Winter into the extensive network of tunnels, past numerous beds where the first casualties of the battle lay, glanced at the pale German nurses whose future was bleak, stealthily surveyed the disheveled French women of the Wehrmacht officers, facing a terrible fate as collaborators. I saw their cavaliers strutting around proudly in high boots, dress uniforms and red-striped trousers, and sailors and infantrymen bustling about, carrying out their orders diligently. Meanwhile, the bombing continued incessantly. Everything in the catacombs, the beds, rocks, the running people, shook under the constant detonations of the bombers and the barking of the heavy flak. That was the beginning of the end of Fortress Brest. After about 30 minutes, the attack suddenly ceased. Once our little world had settled down, the sirens announced the departure of the bomber squadrons, and I returned with Winter to the bunker, or rather what was left of it. What had been a stately complex of buildings just a short time ago lay in ruins before us. The Tommies had done a thorough job, and with the fall of the naval school, the fate of the first U-boat flotilla was sealed. Winter stood silently amidst the ruins of his work. There was nothing left for him to do but to send one of his last boats out to sea. I realized that he wanted to be left alone, and I slowly descended towards my boat. So, another command, another shot at getting sunk. But at least U-953 has a snorkel now, which increases their chances of survival immensely. We will see how it turns out. But now for something completely different. In one of the last episodes of Iron Coffins, Herbert is describing the sinkings of Allied ships by German submarines, specifically the sinking of 3 destroyers by U-953 under her old captain. Now, I didn't question this, why would I, but channel regular Ben Wilson commented saying that those sinkings do not match historical records. Now, I was puzzled at first and checked the usual and reliable sources, which are uboat.net and ubootarchiv.de. And yes, neither side lists any patrols with sunk tonnage for these boats in the time frame that is covered in this part of the book. Now, this struck me as peculiar. Why would Herbert or any other captain lie about this? So I dove deeper and checked out the individual war diaries, most of which are available online. And what do you know, the war diary of U-953 indeed covers a patrol from May 28, 1944 to June 18, 1944, which is covered nowhere else. I will put the cover sheet on screen for you to take a look. And during this patrol, Marbach, the captain, indeed claims to have sunk 3 destroyers. One via a pattern torpedo and 2 others via acoustic homing torpedoes. He's pretty certain that they were H-class destroyers and one carried the pennant number H-90. Now, I've checked the fates of all the H-class DDs and none of them were sunk in June of 1944, and the pennant H-90 belonged to the Clemson-class USS Hunt, which became HMS Broadway later. She, too, did not sink in June 1944. Marbach claims the date as June the 8th, 1944, and I cross-checked this again, and the only warships sunk on or around this date were a minesweeper, USS Tide, HMS Lawford, a captain-class frigate, USS Ridge, a Buckley-class destroyer escort, and finally USS Meredith, a Sumner-class destroyer. All are listed as sunk by something other than U-boats. So, what happened here? It's unclear to me, but for this to be fake, the entire crew would have to be in on it and keep quiet, which I find unlikely. And also, Marbach did get the Knight's Cross for this after all. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments and tell me all about your theories. I will also look into U-763 later. Until then, cheers and bye-bye. Thank you for watching.